and welcome to this home edition of Politics Today. And in this programme today, I'm joined by Major Rhett Parkinson, who's the director of the Armed Forces Christian Union, together with Robin Benson, who's a Christian commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Simon.
And I'll start off with you, Rhett. You served in Afghanistan. You were a major in the British Army. What is your perspective on what is happening or what has happened in Afghanistan over the past 2 weeks with this hasty US withdrawal from the country?
Well, I think, Simon, first of all, it's tragedy on an enormous scale. I think the speed of it all has taken everyone by surprise, not just our government and obviously the Americans, but even the Taliban and people on the ground. Interestingly, I read an article or experience this morning from an Afghan politician who went 2 weeks ago to catch a scheduled flight to Turkey and was on the plane pretty much as the reports came in that the Taliban were entering Kabul. And in fact, the plane got mobbed and the pilot turned everything off, walked off the plane, and she never took off, and then spent a week in hiding and managed to get hold of a member of parliament in Britain, who eventually enabled and facilitated and had the network and the contacts to help this female Afghan politician get out of Kabul. So I think even on the ground, people who normally would be fully informed on everything that's going on were completely caught by surprise. And I think we've watched it unfolding with sort of well, really mixed emotions. You know, as a veteran who's spent time, 6.5 months back in 2011-12, the height of the sort of British input into our time in Afghanistan down in Helmand Province. There's been moments of real depression and despair, and I think a lot of veterans have reflected that. I've had phone calls from friends who didn't even serve in Afghanistan saying, what is going on? And we've talked about it, and we've been able to pray about it and process it a little bit, and that's been really helpful. And I'd certainly encourage anybody who's in that place who's listening to reach out and talk to people about it. We're very happy in the Armed Forces Christian Union to talk to people and pray with people. But at other times, it's really been trying to take some of the positives, and there are some lovely stories. I can come on to some miraculous stories. We've had a couple of members who've been out there, and we've had pretty regular communications and been praying specifically both for them individually and for the evacuation in general, both British, American, and actually an awful lot of other countries. I'm not sure what the total contribution was, but it was huge. This was not, although primarily focused on the Brits and obviously the Americans because they were the biggest players by far, many countries who have had any dealings with Afghanistan have been involved in the last 2 or 3 weeks in the evacuation effort. So yeah, reeling. I think the bomb was it Thursday last week was just another huge tragedy, really a full stop on top of what was already a desperate and tragic situation. So yeah, tragedy on tragedy in a remarkably short period of time.
And Robin, great that you can join us on this home edition of Politics Today. Now, this crisis in Afghanistan has been described as the worst crisis to hit the United States since the Iranian hostage crisis of '79, in which Jimmy Carter was president. And we're already seeing the kind of political fallout from this. Only in today's newspapers is there a kind of leaked story in which the American administration are blaming the British for opening the gates that led to the suicide bombing at Kabul, which killed, I think, 75 Afghans and 30 US Marines. What do you make of this absolute chaos that we are seeing in Afghanistan, and also this surrendering of American leadership on the world stage?
Well, like Rhett was saying, it beggars belief. that the administration of what is supposed to be the most powerful nation on the earth could make such an absolute dog's dinner of a situation that it was clear going back weeks that something was already in the process of going seriously wrong, that the Taliban and their associated allies, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, the Haqqani network, the whole shingbangs and lots of others were on the rise. They were taking over cities, towns, provinces. And that the American administration could not foresee, but all the intelligence that is available to them as the most powerful nation on earth, with everything that's available, could not foresee. And I appreciate what Rhett has said, but they could not foresee where this was going because of the impetus that there was on the Taliban side to literally move across swathes of the country and retake it. And it's interesting. I was listening to a Bible teacher last week who was quoting from, and I have it here in front of me if you don't mind, Simon, he was quoting from Romans 1, verses 21 and 22, where Paul is talking about what happens when people turn their backs on God. And he says, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And then verse 28, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to a debased mind to do what not ought to be done. And he made the point, and he's an American well-known Bible teacher that you and I would be aware of, Simon. That was his take on this, that actually God has removed his hand from any sense of direction in this current American administration, to the point where they are just doing absolutely crazy stuff because there's no control there, no checks and balances anymore to hold back the agenda that this particular administration has. And we are seeing the after effects of that, particularly highlighted in what has unfolded in Afghanistan, particularly over the last couple of weeks.
And Rhett, Douglas Murray, writing in The Sun a couple of days ago, wrote a very good piece in which he effectively said, because of all the American hardware that was left behind in Afghanistan, that the Taliban now are one of the most well-equipped military forces in the world, and that they have more helicopter gunships than the British have. And not only that, he also goes on to say that the Taliban now has more armory than most NATO countries. And in the Sunday Times on Sunday, they've said that the Americans left behind 22,000 Humvee vehicles, 634 M117 vehicles, 155 mine-proof vehicles, 169 M113 armored personnel carriers, 42 trucks and SUVs, 8,000 trucks, 162,000 radios, 16,000 vision goggles, 358,000 assault rifles, 126,000 rockets, 64,000 machine guns, including 33 Mi-17 helicopters, plus 33 Black Hawks, 4 transporter planes, and the list goes on. It's quite frightening to think that the Taliban now is so heavily armed with the latest American military technology, and that already this is falling into the hands of the Iranians and the Pakistanis, that could end up in the hands of the Chinese. So in terms of our military preparedness, isn't this a danger? And also, isn't there a great danger now that the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan, that we are going to see an escalation in terror attacks against the West?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the challenges of getting out of Afghanistan for us, particularly only really holding Kabul airport in a landlocked country that doesn't have any ports. The nearest, we used to ship all our kit through Karachi, and I can't remember what the distance is, but it's something like 1,200 miles. It's a long distance. You have to travel right the way through Pakistan to get to Afghanistan. all of that on the flip side means that much of the hardware, well, first of all, it's sophisticated, and with the best will in the world, even after years of trying to train the Taliban, you've got to be, to fly an aircraft, a helicopter, even to keep vehicles on the road, as we saw with the Afghan National Police, the Afghan National Army, is a huge challenge. And so whilst I would be concerned about the small caliber weapons and the training that can be easily exported in terms of terror and so on, I think the likelihood of keeping all those Humvees serviceable, having fuel to keep them, the mechanics trained and all that will be a huge challenge for them. So I don't think we're going to see, the Taliban armies sweeping that part of the world and taking over other countries. I think they've got so many challenges moving from an insurgency to actually forming an effective government that I think they're going to have to sort of focus on that. What is clearly of real concern and is widely talked about in terms of analysis and trying to think about the future is what type of government, what type of approach do the Taliban want to take? Do they want to integrate into the 21st century sort of globalized world as a credible governing government? And if that's the case, then clearly they're going to have to change the way they did things 25 years ago when they were last in power. Or are they just going to, is the whole country going to effectively, which I think is highly likely, fall back into a competition of, effectively warlords, which is largely why the Taliban came to power in the late 90s. I think that was an element that we never really understood, certainly the British military. My experience of being in Afghanistan, trying to understand the religious bit, the Pashtunwali and Pashtuns against the Dari, or the northern Stan people who came. Who spread across the borders from the various stans across the north of the country. I mean, we're talking about, more weapons. Yes, that is really unfortunate, and hardware and so on. I was talking to somebody this morning who said the AK as a weapon has been so successful and copied in so many countries across the world that actually, if you took every AK in the world, there is enough for 1 in 4 of the entire world's population to hold an AK. So I think in terms of weaponry, sadly, that is all too readily available. It's probably much more readily available now that the Afghan government has fallen and the Taliban are there. We wait to see whether they're going to sponsor Al-Qaeda or whatever is next. And just to correct something that Robin mentioned, that ISK are allies. Then absolutely not. They see the Taliban as soft, as not nearly fundamental enough, as traitors, because they've spoken to the Americans, and they are, the ISK will kill as many Taliban as they can, and vice versa. And in fact, that bomb killed, I think it was 13 American servicemen, 11 Marines and 2 others. It was 28 Taliban reported fighters or soldiers who were also killed, in addition to who knows how many dozens Afghan civilians. I don't think anybody will truly know. It was just an awful lot of people. I've heard figures up to 170 total killed in that bomb. But there is a real competition between ISK and Taliban, and they hate each other and do everything to fight and destroy each other and sadly kill each other.
I have to see how that unfolds. Robin, I just want to ask you about the kind of political fallout from this, because we know that our Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, is under a lot of pressure to resign because he came back from his holiday in Greece late. And it's reported in the Sunday Times that if he came back earlier from his holiday, he could have saved 1,000 lives. Also, according to Sunday Times here, as reported, a minister has said that the Foreign Office failed to roll the pitch with these countries for months. In other words, they haven't had a proper plan to get out allies to the British forces in Afghanistan that were translators and others to third countries, and almost saying that, and also we're seeing that high-ranking military personnel are also saying that if Afghan translators and those who worked with British forces are murdered by the Taliban, then blood will fall on the hands of our Prime Minister, our Foreign Secretary, our Defence Secretary, and also our Home Secretary.
Yeah, I think these sorts of comments, both from opposition politicians, because they're feeding into this sort of media frenzy in this, and from some of our media sources, are bound to come out. I'm not in any way excusing the way that the Foreign Office, the Foreign Secretary, other government departments have handled this. But as Rhett pointed out at the beginning, this whole thing has moved so fast that it has taken everyone by surprise. Now, it's clear that there has not been enough forethought, again, observing what has been going on in Afghanistan for at least the last couple of months. The guys in the Foreign Office, in particular, and probably the Ministry of Defense, surely needed to have sat down together and said, what if?
Absolutely.
And it seems that did not happen. And so we are left with this chaotic, disastrous situation where so many Afghan nationals who had come alongside, Rhett will know this better than I do, because of his actual placement in the territory, who have literally put their lives on the line on our behalf, and on behalf of the states and all the other NATO nations that were involved, and are now left, hanging in the wind. Thankfully, many thousand have been brought out by the various NATO nations, but there's still plenty more left. There are American nationals and British nationals, according to today's newspaper articles, that are still in there. How on earth are they going to get out now that the deadline, runs out at midnight tonight? And you can be sure that the Taliban and all their allies, whoever they are going to maintain that deadline. They're not going to move an absolute inch, because it is one more opportunity to stick it to the West and to make us look humbled in the eyes of them and the religion that they represent, the supremacist religion that they represent. So yes, Dominic Raab and others in all the government departments that are involved in this have serious questions to answer. And I have no doubt whatsoever that when they get hauled in front of the various parliamentary committees in the coming weeks, they are going to be made very uncomfortable in the questions that are posed to them. Whether the Foreign Secretary actually survives this, I think is a question mark. Whether Ben Wallace, as Defense Secretary, survives this, I think is another question mark. With all due respect to Rhett, whether Nick Carter, as Chief of the Defense Staff, survives this, in the light of some of the comments he made a week or so ago about the Taliban has changed, I thought to myself when I read that, what is he smoking? For goodness sake, someone needs to take that guy aside and show him what the Taliban are all about, because he's in cloud cuckoo land if he thinks the Taliban have changed, as the events that unfolded in the succeeding days proved. So there are a lot of people with masses of egg on their face who have got major questions to answer in the coming days and weeks, and some of them may or may not survive in the positions that they're in. What difference that will make to Afghans, Americans, and other NATO nationals stuck in Afghanistan, it is a moot point, because they're now at the mercy of these barbarians, and there isn't any other word for them.
No, absolutely. Thank you for the moral clarity there, Robin. Rhett, I would like to discuss with you what happens now to our strategic relationship with the United States, particularly as the US government seem to be blaming the British for that awful suicide bombing in Kabul airport, which no doubt this is all a kind of American strategic failure, and I put the blame at the White House and also the State Department, that the Defense Department should have been running this whole operation. But I think we have to really think, and my heart goes out to those brave service men and women who served in Afghanistan, who died in Afghanistan, so that the Afghan people could have freedom, that they could be free of Al Qaeda and the Taliban, and also the role that they played in preventing preventing Afghanistan being a base for Al Qaeda to launch terror attacks against the West. And we've also got to acknowledge the fact that if it wasn't for NATO troops in Afghanistan, then the gospel couldn't have been spread out to Afghanistan. Would you like to say something on the legacy of our armed forces and what they've left behind in Afghanistan? And sadly, due to weak leadership in the West, we see that the Taliban has returned to power in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think it was never clear. We sort of drifted into Afghanistan. I mean, obviously 9/11 happened. We put the West, Americans in particular, put their military might behind the Northern Alliance. I think the Taliban were deeply unpopular with the Afghans, and so a little bit like, you know, the Afghan government has been deeply unpopular and weak because of corruption and weak leadership and so on. The Taliban did roll over very quickly back in the back end of 2001, early 2002, and so very quickly we found that, you know, we were in essence supporting a Northern Alliance made up of Northern parties, and you know, Dari became the sort of the key language in Afghanistan, and yet we didn't make an effort. And I've read analysis, and maybe it's food for thought, that, you know, 2002-3 was the time where actually we needed to be engaging with the Taliban or other parties to bring together an effective government that would be nationally recognized. But we drifted through you know, the early 2000s and into the sort of 2010 beyond, when a number of us served, without to my mind, a clear end state of when were we going to finish. I think we thought we were nation building. I have to be honest, when I was serving there, we were using the Muslim year for our various operational orders, because, you know, which was 14, I can't remember exactly what it is, forgive me, it was 1470 something. If we think about where Britain and the West were in the medieval ages and what we were doing to each other, we were taking a country that essentially had one road that ran in a ring around, you know, towards the outside of the country that was tarmacked. Much of the rest of the country was very poor, very underdeveloped, very little electricity, poor schools, poor health, poor education, poor, you know, we've tried to do in 20 years what it has arguably taken us hundreds of years to achieve. Our enemy has 21st century weapons. If I'm allowed to use that sort of, you know, enemy as the Taliban or insurgency or those who are trying to kill us as British armed forces, as Westerners. But we've tried to take a country that, to all intents and purposes, was in medieval times, and rush it in a generation or less from, you know, the 1500s into the 21st century. That was always a tall order, not helped by us spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on firing missiles, flying aeroplanes, and doing all of those things, rather than building roads. We did build a good number of, you know, schools and hospitals and other things. And I'd like to think that, you know, we gave opportunities and a freedom of choice for the Afghans that they wouldn't have had we not been there. What happens to that now? Nobody knows exactly. We have indications from past actions and performance from the Taliban. I hope that they are changed. I probably share Robin's, you know, realpolitik that actually the people on the ground, you know, the young 16, 17, 18-year-old fighter has been indoctrinated and told the things that he's been told, and he thinks he is doing God's will in the way that he is performing his things, chopping people's hands off, taking women and using women as property, not as citizens in their own right, and all the other awful things that we've seen in the past. I hope and pray that doesn't return. I have a horrible feeling that, you know, it's difficult to change that mindset in a hurry.
Robin, I only have about 1.5 minutes left on the program, and our hearts have to go out to the Afghan Christians who are now at the mercy of the Taliban, especially those who have converted from Islam to Christianity, in which the Taliban said if they find them, they will actually burn them alive. And now we hear that the State Department and also the White House are blocking flights out of the country and making life very difficult for those Christians to escape. How much do we need to kind of pray and intercede on behalf of those Afghan
Simon,
Christians who are in a dire situation?
Beyond question, Simon, we need to pray and intercede for our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan. I mean, I watched a video report yesterday from a ministry that is on the ground. It's allied with others who are trying to help the body of Jesus in the land. You know, they made the comment that they perceive that 70% are trying to get out, 30% of the total body have committed themselves to stay no matter what. And they're trying to pour in resources and help to those who want to stay while also helping those who want to get out, which is completely understandable in the circumstances. We in the West need to look and learn from what these brothers and sisters are facing, what they're going through, but also how they are responding to it and how they're coping with it.
I just want to thank Rhett Parkinson from the Armed Forces Christian Union and Robin Benson for this home edition of Politics Day. And thank you so much for your excellent contribution to this program. And I just want to thank you for watching at home. We can see that the situation in Afghanistan is absolutely dire, not only in terms of what this means for armed forces, what this means for the US Armed Forces, what this means for America's role in the world, but also for the escalation that we can expect in terms of Islamist terrorist attacks on the West. But also our heart has to go out to those Afghan Christians who we need to keep in prayer and intercede for, because their situation is dangerous and precarious, and only the mercy of the Lord God Almighty can actually help them. So we need to pray and stand with our brothers and sisters who are confronting the Taliban in Afghanistan. So thank you for watching this home edition of Politics Today.